Imagine you could remember a previous life, a time before you were born. Another identity, another destiny. Reincarnation, the idea that our souls are reborn in a new body after death, is a concept deeply rooted in many cultures and religions. The idea of the cycle of souls has fascinated humanity for thousands of years. But is reincarnation more than just a spiritual concept? Could it be a provable reality? For over 50 years, the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia has been investigating this very question. More than 2,500 children with alleged memories of past lives have been documented, and in 1,400 cases, a previous personality was actually identified, whose life partially matched the children's memories. A 2-year-old child who knows detailed information about World War II that it could never have learned, or a girl in India who remembers a life in a distant village and recognizes a family she has never seen before. But one case stands out in particular, a case that makes even skeptics ponder and is still discussed by serious scientists and journalists today. James Leininger. It is perhaps the best documented case in the history of reincarnation research. Television appearances, detailed records, independent witnesses, and specific statements made by a toddler that later turn out to be true. The apparent evidence lines up as seamlessly as the elements in the periodic table. The case is so convincing that Dr. Jim B. Tucker, professor of psychology at the University of Virginia, has described it as the strongest evidence for reincarnation available. Today, we want to examine this very case. Are we dealing with irrefutable evidence where conventional explanations are simply not sufficient? Or are there convincing mundane explanations for everything? At the end, I will try to answer this very question. By the way, throughout the video I have hidden clues to a puzzle. The first person to successfully complete all the necessary steps and leave the correct solution code in a comment under the video wins an Amazon voucher worth $100. Good luck. Our story begins on April 19th, 1998. On this day, James Leininger is born. His parents Bruce and Andrea Leininger are overjoyed at the birth of their son. In the following months, James develops into a happy and curious toddler. His parents watch with joy as he thrives while exploring his surroundings. James is just 22 months old when his father Bruce decides to take him on a special outing. The destination is the Kavanaugh Flight Museum in Dallas. The high ceilings of the museum echo with the muffled hum of the many visitors. Bruce leads his son through the exhibition, past gleaming aircraft fuselages and historical photographs. But when they reach the section with World War II fighter planes, something remarkable happens. Little James freezes. His eyes widen. His mouth opens in awe. It's as if someone had flipped a switch inside him. The enthusiasm that now bursts out of him is completely unexpected for Bruce. James points to every detail of the displayed aircraft. His little hands grasp at the air as if he wants to touch the machines. He pulls his father from one exhibit to the next, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Bruce is baffled. He tries to lead James to other exhibits, but the boy keeps returning to the fighter planes. It's as if this specific era of aviation history exerts a magical attraction on him. The minutes pass, turn into hours. Once, twice, 3 times Bruce tries to end the museum visit, but James's fascination is unbroken. His body seems to vibrate with energy. His eyes can't get enough of the World War II aircraft. After more than 3 hours of intense observation and amazement, Bruce gently guides his son to the exit. James's cheeks are flushed with excitement, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. It's clear, this museum visit was far more than just a pastime for little James. As they leave the museum, James proudly holds his new treasures in hands. A Blue Angels video and several toy planes. Small mementos of a day that would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. In the weeks that follow, it becomes clear just how deep the impression of the museum visit was. James watches the Blue Angels video over and over again. His new toy planes become his constant companions. The little boy's enthusiasm for airplanes seems inexhaustible. But first, let's take a look at his parents. Bruce Leininger is a hard-working man, employed by the Oilfield Services Corporation of America. His days are shaped by the challenges of the oil industry. In the evenings, he returns home to his family, which is the center of his life. Andrea Leininger has chosen to dedicate herself entirely to raising her son. She observes every development, every progress of her little James with loving attention. The Leiningers find support and guidance in their faith. Bruce is active in the evangelical Christian movement, whose values and beliefs shape family life. At the same time, though, he's firmly anchored in reality. Supernatural and paranormal, Bruce wants nothing to do with such topics. A month after the memorable museum visit, something happens that will deeply confuse Andrea Leininger. On an ordinary day, she pushes the stroller with James down the street. The sun is shining, birds are chirping. As they pass a hobby shop, her gaze falls on a container of plastic toys in front of the store. She stops and reaches for a model airplane with a propeller. Andrea hands James the toy and explains in a gentle voice.
Look, James, the plane even has a bomb attached underneath.
James looks at the model attentively for a moment. Then he looks up at his mother and says in his still clumsy toddler language,
"That's not a bomb, Mama. That's a drop tank."
Andrea freezes. Drop tank? A term she has never heard before. What does her son mean by that? Later that day, she tells her husband about the incident. He explains to her that a drop tank is an additional fuel tank that aircraft carry on long-distance flights. But this explanation only raises more questions. How could James, who was just beginning to speak, know about something so specific? How did he know this technical term that even his mother had never heard before? May arrives, and with it, James's second birthday. On Memorial Day weekend, Bruce decides to further encourage James's interest in airplanes. Once again, they make their way to the Flight Museum in Dallas. As with the first visit, James shows an extraordinary enthusiasm for World War II aircraft. His eyes light up as he rushes from one exhibit to the next. Bruce watches in amazement as his son seems to study every detail of the machines. In the following months, his fascination grows even stronger. Toy airplanes become his constant companions. But these are not just any airplanes. James only has eyes for World War II models. He sleeps with them, eats with them, bathes with them. But then, one night, the situation changes. James startles awake, his body trembling, sweat on his forehead. He screams, writhes in his sheets, his eyes wide open. Andrea and Bruce rush to him. After a few minutes, James calms down again. In the following weeks, this scenario repeats itself. 2, 3, sometimes even 5 times a week, the silence of the night is interrupted by James's desperate screams. Concerned, Andrea turns to her pediatrician. After the examination, he explains that nightmares at this age are not unusual and assures Andrea that they will probably stop on their own. But despite this explanation, Andrea remains worried. The intensity of James's nightmares and their frequency seem extraordinary. Several more months pass, but nighttime peace does not return to the Leininger house. On the contrary, the nightmares become even more intense. On a particularly stormy night, Bruce and Andrea are once again awakened by their son's desperate screams. But this time, something is different. James's words are clearer, his movements more violent.
Airplane crash on fire. Little man can't get out.
James writhers in bed as if trapped in an invisible struggle. His arms flail wildly, fingers curled as if desperately trying to grasp something that isn't there. Sweat covers his forehead, his face contorted in an expression of pure fear and desperation. His legs kick into the air with astonishing force, again and again, as if he were trying with all his might to break through an invisible barrier. It's as if you could literally hear the cracking of glass that wants to shatter but doesn't give way. James's face is red with exertion. His entire body seems to be in a state of highest tension, trapped in a life or death struggle. Bruce and Andrea stand beside him, dumbfounded, unable to free their son from this state. The intensity of his panic, the desperation in his voice. In the following weeks, this scenario repeats itself night after night. Always the same words, always the same desperate movements. The parents' uncertainty grows increasingly. What is happening to their little boy? Where do these frighteningly detailed visions in his dreams come from? But the nightmares are no longer confined to the night. When Bruce leaves for a business trip, little James urgently warns him about a plane crash. The concern in the child's eyes is genuine and disturbing. Again and again, James destroys his beloved toy planes by deliberately crashing them into the coffee table. Here, too, it seems as if he's reenacting a crash, over and over again. But the real breakthrough comes one evening when James is 28 months old. As he's being put to bed, he spontaneously begins to talk about his recurring dream.
Mama, do you remember the little man in my dream? That's me.
Andrea, surprised by this revelation, carefully asks for more. James's answers are as detailed as they are astounding.
I'm also called James. I flew a Corsair. I took off from a boat, and the boat was called Natoma.
Bruce, disturbed by his son's precise statements, begins to research on the internet. Surely, he will quickly determine that the name James mentioned has no relevance. But what he finds doesn't bring the relief he had hoped for. The USS Natoma Bay was indeed a US aircraft carrier stationed in the Pacific during World War II. He prints out the information. The date on the printout is silent proof of this extraordinary moment. The confirmation of James's statements presents the family with a dilemma. How could a toddler know about a ship and even name it exactly? One that was used in the war long before he was born. Bruce struggles with these findings. He desperately searches for a logical, scientific explanation. Surely, it has to be just a crazy coincidence. On a quiet evening in October, when James is 2.5 years old, he again begins to talk about the little man from his nightmares. He explains that he can't remember this James's last name, but then he added a crucial detail.
The little man James had a best friend.
When his parents ask for the name, James answers without hesitation.
Jake Larson. And he was also a pilot.
The mention of this name changes everything. It was no longer just a vague dream, but a concrete detail that could be verified. A month later, another incident occurs. Bruce is holding a book about the Battle of Iwo Jima, a birthday gift for his own father. James, curious as always, climbs onto his lap and looks at the pages with him. When they reach an aerial photograph of the military base on the island, his facial expression changes. His eyes widen, his body stiffens. With a trembling voice, he says,
That's where my plane was shot down.
Bruce, surprised by this sudden statement, asks incredulously,
What?
My plane was shot down there, Daddy.
In the following days, Bruce delves deeper into intensive research. The name Jack Larson doesn't let him rest. On the website of the American Battle Monuments Commission, he finally finds a lead. He identifies 10 possible Jack, James, or John Larson who died in World War II. But the right Jack, the one who must have served on the Natoma Bay, is not among them. Soon, he discovers that the USS Natoma Bay was indeed in action in March 1945 during the invasion of Iwo Jima. Exactly as James had described it. The strange coincidences are increasing. More and more of James's statements seem to be confirmed. Bruce's research leads him to information about veteran meetings. And finally he contacts the Natoma Bay Association. On December 8, 2000, Bruce finds himself in a phone conversation with Leo Pyatt, a former pilot of the VC-81 squadron that flew from the USS Natoma Bay during the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Yes, I knew Jack Larson. He flew out one day and never returned.
Jack Larson, he had indeed existed. But then, Pyatt adds something that makes Bruce prick up his ears again.
But you know, no Corsairs were flown from the Natoma Bay.
Bruce feels a wave of relief wash over him. Here it was, the discrepancy he had been looking for. The Corsair that James had allegedly flown in his dream couldn't have existed. As he ends the conversation, Bruce finds himself in a state of emotional turmoil. On one hand, he has found a clear inconsistency in James's story. On the other hand, he cannot ignore the fact that Jack Larson, a name his son knew for no apparent reason, was indeed a real pilot on the USS Natoma Bay. How was this possible? Exhausted from their son's nightly terrors, Bruce and Andrea seek new ways to help James. Andrea contacts Carol Bowman, a therapist, author, and expert in the field of children's memories of past lives.
Explain to James that while his nightmares might be based on facts, they happened in the past. Tell him that he's no longer in any danger.
Andrea immediately puts Bowman's advice into action. To her surprise and relief, the nightmares indeed begin to become less frequent. Night after night, more peace returns to the Leininger house. With the spring of 2001, James discovers a new form of expressing his inner world. As soon as he's old enough to hold a pen, he begins to draw intensively. What appears on the paper amazes his parents. Again and again, his pictures show the same content. Airplanes in dramatic battle scenes, burning and crashing planes, aerial battles and explosions in the sky. But it's not just the content of the pictures that astonishes Bruce and Andrea. It's the way James signs them. James 3, he scribbles under each picture. When his parents ask if this means his age, he shakes his head.
No, I'm the third James.
For his birthday, Bruce gives James a G.I. Joe doll.
I'm calling him Billy.
James announces as he unwraps the doll. His parents exchange questioning glances. Where does this name come from? One September evening, while James is playing with his planes, he suddenly pauses. With a seriousness far beyond his years, he looks up at his parents.
Before I was born, I was a pilot. My plane was hit in the engine, crashed into the water, and that's how I died.
The precision of this statement makes his parents shudder. It's not just the content of his words, but also the calm conviction in his voice that leaves them speechless. James, however, seems unimpressed by the effect of his words. He turns back to his toys as if he had just said something completely ordinary. When James gets a second G.I. Joe figure in December, he names it, again without hesitation, Leon. The extreme affection he develops for these two figures puzzles his parents. It's as if Billy and Leon have a deeper meaning for him. September 2002. Bruce Leininger enters a hall in San Diego, California. Around him, veterans and relatives gather. It's a meeting of the Natoma Bay Association. The atmosphere is charged with memories of untold stories. Barely arrived, Bruce seeks out John Dewitt, the association's historian. He has a question that has been bothering him for 2 years.
I'm looking for information about a pilot named Jack Larson. Do you have anything about him in your records?
Without hesitation, Dewitt reaches for the current membership list of the association. Bruce's heart beats faster as Dewitt goes through the list. Then, suddenly,
There he is. He's alive and lives in Arkansas.
the realization hits Bruce like a blow. For 2 years, he had been searching for a dead Jack Larson. And now, completely unexpectedly, he has found him. Alive and real. But that's not all. Dewitt hands Bruce a list. The names of all 21 fallen of the Natoma Bay. Bruce's hands tremble as he goes through the list. Suddenly, his breath catches. One name stands out. James M. Houston Jr. The information tumbles over in Bruce's head. Houston was killed on March 3rd, 1945, during the Battle of Iwo Jima. He was the only pilot who lost his life in this battle from the Natoma Bay.
James 3.
Bruce mumbles. Suddenly, James's strange signature makes sense. Houston was a junior, the second James. His son sees himself as the third. All the details seem to fit. This had to be him, the man his son couldn't seem to let go of. More details come to light. Houston was flying an FM-2 Wildcat when he was killed. But questions remain. No one saw how Houston's plane crashed. The exact circumstances of his death remain unclear, and the fact that Houston was flying a Wildcat when he crashed supports Leo Pyatt's previous statement and contradicts James's belief that he crashed in a Corsair. A few weeks after the meeting, Bruce makes his way to Springdale, Arkansas. His destination, the home of Jack and Dorothy Larson.
Here it is, March 3rd, 1945. Mission to Chichijima.
Larson says while pointing to an entry in his old flight logbook. Bruce's gaze fixes on the date. It's the day James has spoken about so often. Jack begins to tell. His voice grows quieter as he describes the terrible conditions during the battle. His words paint pictures of chaos, fear, and bravery. The following day, at breakfast, Bruce gathers courage. He tells the Larsons about James, about his extraordinary fascinations with planes from that era. He mentions James's amazing knowledge of technical details and historical events, far beyond that of a typical 3-year-old. Jack and Dorothy listen attentively, their faces a mixture of amazement and curiosity. Suddenly, Jack stands up and leaves the room. When he returns, he's holding something in his hands. It's his old flight equipment. Helmet, goggles, and oxygen mask. With a serious look, he hands them to Bruce.
It's for James. From this day.
Back at home, Bruce gives the equipment to James. The way he handles the equipment seems unusually familiar and professional for a child his age. On an autumn evening in October of 2002, James surprises his parents with another remarkable statement. He had chosen them as his parents. Even more astonishing is what he adds.
I seen you before, in Hawaii.
Bruce and Andrea exchange baffled looks. James describes a big pink hotel and a dinner on the beach. With growing amazement, they recognize the details of their honeymoon. 5 years before James's birth. The Big Pink Hotel turns out to be the Coral Pink Royal Hawaiian Resort in Honolulu. The accuracy of James's descriptions leaves his parents speechless. Andrea Leininger's further research leads to a surprising discovery. James Houston Jr. had 2 sisters. In February, Andrea contacts Anne Houston Barron. Shortly after, Anne sends them photos of James Houston Jr. upon request. One picture stands out. It shows James in front of a Corsair. Houston was indeed part of an elite squadron that flew Corsairs for testing purposes before being transferred to VC-81 on the Natoma Bay. Suddenly, his son's persistent claim that he flew a Corsair makes sense. The apparent crucial contradiction that had initially reassured Bruce so much and given him the chance to cling to a possible conventional explanation dissolves into thin air. Bruce Leininger's search for the truth leads him ever deeper into the past. He discovers that Avenger torpedo bombers from Squadron VC-83 of the USS Sergeant Bay were involved in the fateful attack. A new lead that promises hope for answers. June 2003. An unexpected call reaches Bruce. On the other end of the line is John Durham, a veteran of the Sergeant Bay Squadron. Durham reports that he witnessed Houston's crash. Moreover, he himself was hit shortly after. Durham reads from his diary.
One of the escort planes took a direct hit to the nose and burst into flames.
Each new statement confirms details that James had previously mentioned in his memories. Bruce feels his last resistance crumbling. The coincidences are too numerous, too precise to ignore. In this moment of acceptance, Bruce opens himself to a possibility he had long vehemently rejected. His son's story, as incredible as it may seem, finds confirmation in the memories of those who were actually there. December 2003. James Leininger, now 4 years old, sits amidst wrapping paper and opens his last Christmas gift. It's a third G.I. Joe doll. With a smile, James takes the figure in his hand and announces without hesitation,
I'm calling him Walter.
Bruce and Andrea exchange a confused look.
The names come from those who greeted me in heaven.
Their son's words make the parents shudder. They remember the other 2 G.I. Joe dolls that James named Billy and Leon. Soon, Bruce finds out Billy Peeler, Leon Connor, and Walter Devlin. All 3 were part of Houston's VC-81 squadron. And even more shocking, All three were killed in late 1944, a few months before James Houston. The names match exactly those James gave to his dolls, a correspondence that seems beyond any coincidence. The Leiningers contact the families of the three pilots and learn even the hair colors of the killed pilots exactly match those of the figures James selected. September of 2004. Bruce, Andrea, and now 6-year-old James set out for the Natoma Bay Veterans Meeting. The tension is palpable as they approach the venue. Shortly before their arrival, Bruce mentions Houston's sister Anne, who will also be attending the meeting. Suddenly, James interrupts him.
Her name isn't Anne, it's Annie.
As it turns out later, it was a nickname only her brother had used. As they enter the hall, they are enveloped by the atmosphere of reunion joy. Suddenly, James freezes.
That's Bob Greenwald.
James exclaims without seeing the man. He has recognized him by his voice alone. Throughout the day, James meets Jack Larson and other veterans. He moves among the old soldiers with a familiarity that amazes everyone. Later in the evening, Bruce and Andrea observe James looking at the veterans. His face shows a mixture of joy and sadness.
I'm glad to see them, but it makes me sad how old they've become.
As James grows older, his extraordinary memories begin to fade. But in the summer of 2006, when James is 8 years old, a unique opportunity presents itself to the family. A Japanese production company invites the Leiningers to Chichijima to participate in the show Mystery Experience. After a 26-hour boat ride from Tokyo, they reach the island. Standing on a cliff, James looks out over the sea. Suddenly, he says in a quiet voice,
This is where the planes flew in when James died.
Bruce makes a mental note. Later, he checks the entry angle mentioned by James against an air map from the mission report. It matches exactly. The family boards a fishing boat to the crash site. There, surrounded by the endless expanse of the ocean, James will say goodbye. Bruce begins to read out the names of the 21 fallen heroes of the Natoma Bay. His voice echoes across the water. For each name, James throws a piece of coral into the water. His small hands tremble slightly, as if he could feel the weight of history.
James M. Houston Jr.
At this name, James pauses. He stares at the last piece of coral in his hand, slowly turning it between his fingers. Suddenly, something breaks within him. Tears stream down his face, as if a flood of long-held emotions is finally bursting forth. Bruce and Andrea try to comfort their son, but James ignores them. For 15 long minutes, he cries continuously, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then, as if he had made an inner decision, he straightens up. With tears still streaming down his face, he looks at the water one last time. His hand slowly rises to a salute.
Goodbye, James.
With these words, James drops the last piece of coral into the water. It hits the surface with a gentle splash, circles spreading out and disappearing into the infinity of the ocean. As the boat slowly returns to shore, there is a sense of peace and closure in the air. James's shoulders seem lighter, his gaze clearer. It's as if he has finally put down a heavy burden that he had been carrying for a very, very long time. At first glance, the Leininger case fascinates and astounds. But is it true? During my research, it quickly became clear that this is where it gets very complicated. Because as so often, the devil is in the details. Before we delve deeper into the evaluation, let's briefly introduce the most important experts on both sides of the debate. On the pro-reincarnation side, we have Dr. Jim B. Tucker, a renowned child psychiatrist and professor at the University of Virginia, known for his research on children with alleged memories of past lives. He has extensively studied the James Leininger case and published several scientific papers on it. And Dr. James G. Matlock, an anthropologist and parapsychologist who has also published several scientific papers on the Leininger case. On the skeptical side, we primarily have Dr. Michael Sudduth, a philosophy professor at San Francisco State University who questions the methods and conclusions of reincarnation research and has undertaken a very comprehensive critical analysis of the case. Many other critical voices have commented on the Leininger case over the years, including renowned skeptics like Michael Shermer. After intensive research, I can at least state, to date, there are no 100% convincing explanations for all unusual aspects of the case. At the same time, many of the proofs appear less substantiated upon closer examination than they were initially presented. A fundamental problem in investigating the case is the credibility of the event chronology. It cannot be independently verified from the Leiningers themselves. There is a lack of sufficiently independently verifiable facts that could provide conclusive evidence of supernatural occurrences. Moreover, Michael Sudduth's critical analysis has raised many serious objections. His arguments regarding possible everyday explanations for James's knowledge are particularly noteworthy. To name just two, the Blue Angels video. Sudduth determined that this video contains a 10-minute segment about World War II, including scenes of crashing planes. Many of James's statements and behaviors that his parents considered extraordinary could have come from this. Jim Tucker himself never found the video and therefore also never evaluated it. The Kavanaugh Flight Museum. During his visit there, James could have had access to detailed information, including about the Wildcat and Corsair aircraft types. However, the Corsair itself was not exhibited during any of their visits. Sudduth also argues that some of the parents' statements have changed over the years, especially after the connection to James Houston Jr. was already established. He compares two different chronologies. One from 2003, the one that Bruce Leininger originally provided to historian DeWitt. Sudduth considers this one overall more credible, and the Leiningers' own official chronology itself, from their 2009 book Soul Survivor. Sudduth identifies significant differences in important dates. For example, the mention of the aircraft carrier Natoma Bay. In the 2003 chronology, this was dated as late October to November 2000. In the 2009 version, it was already dated on August 27th, 2000. The mention of Jack Larson. 2003, it was dated late October to November 2000, and 2009 on October 5th, 2000. The first exchange between Bowman and Andrea Leininger. In the 03 chronology, July to August 2000, in the 2009 chronology, in January to February 2001, almost half a year later. These discrepancies lead Suddath to question the credibility of the Leiningers as the primary source of information. He implies that these changes might possibly indicate deliberate deception. James Matlock and Jim B. Tucker strongly reject Suddath's accusations. They see no evidence of deception. They point out that simple memory errors could be responsible for the discrepancies. They even accuse Suddath of not giving sufficient consideration to dated pieces of evidence, such as emails and printouts, in his analysis. So what is the answer? Deliberate deception, or simply memories fading over the years? Upon close examination of the printouts created by Bruce during his research, I noticed a crucial detail. Next to the date, each printout also shows the entire URL that was accessed. This opened up the possibility for me to verify the authenticity of the documents myself. For this, I used the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, a kind of digital library that regularly saves snapshots of websites. My hope? If the respective URLs were saved at appropriate times, I might be able to gain new insights. And indeed, the URL on the document mentioning Natoma for the first time was no longer accessible under the printed URL after September 15, 2000. Consequently, Bruce Leininger would no longer have had the opportunity to access the URL on the printout and create the printout in this form at that time. The earlier date of the 09 chronology is confirmed. The 03 chronology cannot be correct in this case. This discovery has far-reaching implications for the case. It not only refutes the 03 chronology on this specific point, but also questions Suddath's assumption that this earlier version is generally more reliable. Even more significant is that it refutes the implied accusation that the Leiningers had fabricated the evidence documents after the fact. My own findings, thus, support the credibility of the Leiningers and show that some of Suddath's skeptical assumptions do not seem to be correct. But does this necessarily mean that a conventional explanation is impossible? No. An alternative explanation could be, for example, that Bruce Leininger made the printouts independently of the incidents with James. This theory is supported by the fact that Bruce initially told witnesses he interviewed that he was writing a book about the Natoma Bay. He only admitted much later that his son's alleged strange knowledge was the motivation. Moreover, many of the further arguments put forward by Suddath still carry weight. Extreme claims require extremely solid evidence. And this is precisely what I unfortunately could not find in the Leininger case overall. Despite some fascinating aspects, there are simply too many open questions and possible, albeit in some cases far-fetched, alternative explanations. Therefore, I cannot overall agree with the statement that the James Leininger case is clear proof of reincarnation. Nevertheless, the case remains a mystery in some aspects. At what number of consecutive coincidences do we consider a conventional explanation unlikely or even impossible? Is a 22-month-old infant really capable of independently absorbing and reproducing all the specific information mentioned? Is it plausible that such a young child randomly mentions several names that later stand in direct relation to each other? Or are the Leiningers indeed fraudsters who have managed to construct an almost perfect lie over more than a decade? At this point, I'd like to invite you to draw your own conclusions. At least it can be stated that for many years, until the publication of their book in 2009, the Leiningers did not profit financially from the incidents or actively seek publicity. If you have questions about the case, feel free to leave a comment. I will answer to the best of my knowledge and conscience. For those of you who want to delve deeper into the topic yourselves, in the video description you'll find a link to my source document. Whether true or not, the James Leininger case reminds us of how complex and fascinating the investigation of supernatural occurrences can be. It challenges us to think critically, but also invites us to remain open to the inexplicable.